You probably think you're steering your life with full awareness, right? Making choices, deciding things, shaping your day. But here's the twist. You've got a backstage version of yourself, calling a surprising amount of the shots. And most of the time, you don't even notice it. Carl Jung talked about this hidden side, this unconscious layer influencing how you think and react. And if you can learn to work with it instead of letting it run everything quietly in the background, your mindset won't just improve, it'll flip completely. Today, I'm giving you 7 steps that do exactly that. 7 steps that pull your mindset out of autopilot and put you back in the driver's seat. Let's get straight into it. The first step: catch your automatic patterns. Let's slow down and zoom in on something you rarely notice. The split second before you react. Most people never look there. They just respond. They just are who they are. They assume their reactions are natural, logical, justified, unavoidable. But they're not. They're patterns. And Carl Jung would tell you they're coming from a part of you that learned these reactions long before you ever questioned them. Here's how these patterns sneak in. You walk into a situation and, without thinking, you predict the outcome. You see a challenge and, without thinking, you assume your usual response is the right one. You hit a moment of tension and, without thinking, you fall back into familiar territory. That last part is the key. Without thinking. If you've ever wondered why you keep circling the same frustrations, making the same decisions, or feeling the same internal blocks, it's because the old pattern is faster than your awareness. It fires before you even know it happened. But here's the breakthrough. Once you start catching these automatic impulses in the moment, they lose their power, not because you fight them, but because you can finally see them. And seeing a pattern is like turning on a light in a room you've walked through in the dark your entire life. Everything that used to feel inevitable suddenly becomes a choice. Start simple. Notice the moment your body tenses before you respond. Notice the thought that shows up before you make a decision. Notice the assumption you make before you even know you made it. These tiny observations are the doorway into your unconscious programming, the part Jung spent so much time trying to make visible. You're not trying to change anything yet. You're not forcing a new mindset. You're just watching what actually happens inside you as it happens. People underestimate this step because it feels small. But it's not small. It's the moment the automatic becomes conscious. And once the automatic becomes conscious, it stops being automatic. That's the real starting line for mindset transformation. And now that you're catching the patterns, the next step is to challenge the stories those patterns were built on. That's where things get even more interesting. Step 2. Question the story you tell yourself. Now that you've started catching your automatic patterns, let's talk about something even sneakier. The story you tell yourself about who you are. Every mindset sits on top of a story. Not a dramatic one, not a written one, just the quiet, constant narrative running in the background of your thoughts. And here's the part almost no one realizes. Your story came from somewhere, but most of the time you didn't consciously choose it. Maybe it formed from past experiences. Maybe it patterned itself through repetition. Maybe you picked it up without noticing because it felt familiar. But once it settles in, it becomes the script you use to explain everything you do. Things like, "This is just how I react. I never do well with this. I've always been this way. This always happens to me. I'm just not that kind of person." Notice how subtle these are. None of them scream for attention. They whisper. And because they whisper, they feel like facts instead of interpretations. Carl Jung understood this well. The stories we don't question become the structures that shape our identity. So here's the step. You take the story you've accepted for years, and you interrogate it. Does the story line up with real evidence? Or does it line up with a version of yourself you've simply gotten used to repeating? Ask yourself, is this really true, or is it just familiar? When did I start believing this? Did I choose this belief, or did I inherit it from an old version of me? This is where people feel resistance, because questioning your story feels like shaking the foundation you stand on. But that's exactly the point. If the foundation is built on old conclusions, you're not thinking freely. You're repeating old mental echoes. And here's the twist most people never see. The moment you question a story, it stops being a rule. It becomes an option. That shift alone is enough to crack open your mindset. Because once you realize you're not locked into the narrative you've been running, you can rewrite it. But before you rewrite it, you have to meet something even more powerful. The parts of yourself you usually pretend aren't there. That's where the next step goes, and it changes everything. Step 3. Meet the parts of yourself you usually ignore. Alright, here's where things get real. Up to now, you've been observing patterns and questioning the story you live inside. But step 3 goes deeper. It takes you into the territory Carl Jung believed was the most overlooked and the most powerful. The parts of yourself you've pushed to the side. Let's strip this down. Every person has traits, impulses, reactions, and tendencies they don't like acknowledging. Not because they're dramatic or destructive. Most of the time, they're just inconvenient. They don't fit the identity you've built, the standards you hold yourself to, or the image you prefer to present. So you push them down. You minimize them. You pretend they're not part of you. Jung called this the shadow, but don't get caught up in the name. It's not some mysterious concept. It's the everyday version of you that you label as not me. Things like the frustration you don't want to admit you feel, the ambition you downplay because you think it looks arrogant, the hesitation you ignore because it feels uncomfortable to admit, the assertiveness you tamp down because you're not used to it, the competitiveness you pretend you don't have, the curiosity you shut off because it doesn't match the role you've been playing. These aren't the bad parts of you. They're the unused, unintegrated parts. And this is the twist most people never realize. What you push away doesn't disappear. It just acts from the background where you can't see it. When Jung talked about becoming whole, he didn't mean becoming perfect. He meant becoming aware of everything you already are, especially the parts you've ignored. Because those ignored parts don't just sit quietly. They influence your reactions. They distort your thinking. They limit your choices. And they shape your mindset without your permission. So here's the step. You start getting honest about what you usually avoid in yourself. Ask yourself, what part of me shows up in small ways that I immediately deny, hide, or explain away? What strengths do I actually have that I shrink because they don't fit my usual self-image? What tendencies keep resurfacing even when I try to suppress them? When you identify these parts, you don't judge them. You don't argue with them. You don't try to eliminate them. You recognize them. Because awareness doesn't just reveal what you've ignored, it gives you access to it. Here's the breakthrough. The traits you've labeled as not me often contain the exact qualities you need for growth. The boldness you set aside might be the key to your next level. The caution you ignore might be the missing piece in your decision-making. The intensity you soft-pedal might be the fuel you've been missing. This step isn't about rewriting anything yet. It's about expanding your internal map. You can't change a mindset if you're only working with half of yourself. But the moment you meet these parts without pushing them away, something powerful happens. Your sense of self becomes bigger than your old story. And once you see yourself more fully, step 4 becomes way more natural, because now you're learning how to actually observe your inner world instead of just reacting to it. Step 4. Build awareness like it's a muscle. Now that you've uncovered the parts of yourself you usually ignore, it's time to develop the skill that ties everything together: awareness. And let's get one thing straight. Awareness is not something you get once and then never lose. It's not a switch you flip. It's a muscle. If you don't train it, it weakens. If you build it, it becomes one of your strongest tools. Most people move through their lives reacting first and thinking later. They notice what they did after they already did it. They realize what they meant after the moment has passed. They understand the pattern only once it's repeated for the 100th time. But when your awareness sharpens, the timeline shifts. You start noticing things as they happen, not after. Here's what that looks like. You feel the rise of irritation the moment it starts, not when you're already in the middle of it. You catch the internal tightening right before you shut down. You sense the pull toward an old habit before you fall into it. You hear the beginning of an old thought pattern before it completes its usual loop. And this is the turning point. Once you notice something in real time, you can choose what happens next. You're no longer being dragged around by your patterns. You're tracking them. You're observing them. You're predicting them. And the second you can predict a pattern, you can interrupt it. Jung's work sits right here. He believed transformation begins the moment the unconscious becomes conscious. When your awareness picks up even the smallest internal shift, a tightened jaw, a familiar thought, a drop in focus, you're catching your internal system in motion. That's powerful, because awareness shrinks the distance between who you are and who you're becoming. Let's make it concrete. Start noticing the exact moment your motivation dips, the moment you hesitate before speaking, the shift in your posture when something challenges you, the tone of your inner voice when you're pushing yourself, the story that wants to replay when you feel uncertain. These microsignals are gold. They show you the hidden structure behind your mindset. They reveal what drives your reactions. They expose what you default to when you're not paying attention. This step isn't about correcting anything. It's not about forcing a new response. It's about building the ability to see. Because if you can't see your inner world clearly, you can't shape it intentionally. And here's the best part. The more you practice awareness, the quicker you notice your patterns. The quicker you notice your patterns, the less they control you. And the less they control you, the more space you have to design a mindset that actually fits who you're becoming. But awareness alone isn't enough. Once you start seeing these internal patterns, you'll realize something important. Some of the stories you've been living by don't just need to be questioned. They need to be replaced. That's exactly where the next step goes. Step 5. Replace the old script with a chosen one. By now, you've watched your patterns fire in real time, and you've started seeing the stories that shaped them. Now we hit the pivot point, the step where your mindset stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you actively design. This is where you replace the old script. And let's make something very clear. Replacing the old script doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It doesn't mean forcing positivity. It doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means taking control of how you interpret what happens inside you. Carl Jung understood this better than most. The meaning you assign to your inner reactions is what determines how you act next. If the meaning is outdated, the actions you take will be outdated too. Here's how the old script usually works. A pattern fires. A familiar thought pops up. You interpret it the exact same way you always have. And because you interpret it the same way, you react the same way. It's a loop. A perfectly predictable psychological loop. But now you know the story behind the loop. You've caught the pattern. You've questioned the narrative. You've explored the parts of yourself you normally ignore. You've built real-time awareness. So now the question becomes, what do you want the new interpretation to be? Let's walk through it with clarity. Old script. I always lose focus when things get challenging. New script. This is the point where my attention dips. It's a signal, not a failure. Old script. This reaction is just who I am. New script. This reaction is familiar, not permanent. Old script. I know exactly how this will turn out. New script. That's an assumption from the past, not information about the present. Notice what's happening here. You're not denying reality. You're updating it. You're choosing language that leaves room for change. You're choosing an interpretation that gives you agency. You're choosing to respond instead of react. And here's the game-changing part. Your mind listens to the story you choose, not the story you inherited, not the story you've repeated, the story you choose now. This isn't about replacing one identity with another. It's about rewriting the lens you use to make sense of your inner world. Because the lens shapes the meaning, and the meaning shapes your actions, and your actions build your mindset all over again, from the inside out. But here's the catch. A new script doesn't become real just because you say it. It becomes real because you act on it. That's what step 6 is for. And it's the moment everything becomes irreversible. Step 6. Take one small action that proves the new mindset. This is the moment the entire transformation shifts from theory into reality. Because a new mindset isn't something you think your way into. It becomes real only when you act in a way the old you wouldn't have. Here's the truth most people avoid. Your mind doesn't fully believe a new script until your actions confirm it. You can rewrite your interpretations and reshape your inner story all day long, but until you take an action that backs it up, your brain treats it like a suggestion, not a shift. Carl Jung pointed out that what we don't bring into action stays in the realm of possibility, not identity. Identity is built on behavior. Behavior is what tells the mind, this is who I am now. And here's the good news. You don't need a dramatic action, not even a big one. A small action, precise and intentional, aligned with your new script, is enough to start rewiring the entire system. Let's break this down. You replace an old script like, I always pull back when something stretches me. Your small action could be, you stay with the challenge for 5 minutes longer than you normally would. You replace a script like, I'm not the kind of person who tries new approaches. Your small action could be, you experiment with one new method today, instead of repeating your familiar routine. You replace a script like, I don't handle pressure well. Your small action could be, you pause and observe the tension instead of rushing to escape it. These aren't huge leaps. They're not dramatic life overhauls. They're simple, direct demonstrations. The point isn't to shock yourself. It's to show yourself. Because the moment you take an action that contradicts your old identity, even in the smallest way, you create a crack in the old structure, and through that crack, something new enters. That tiny action becomes evidence. Evidence becomes reinforcement. Reinforcement becomes momentum. Momentum becomes identity. Here's the part most people never realize. Your mind trusts action more than intention. It trusts proof more than hope. It trusts what you do more than what you say you'll do. That's why this step is the irreversible one. You're not waiting to feel different before acting differently. You're acting differently, so you start feeling different. And once you take that first aligned action, something shifts inside you that can't be undone. You now have physical, real-world confirmation that you can operate outside the old script. That's how the new mindset starts settling in. But settling in isn't the same as staying. For that, you need the final step, the one that makes this transformation permanent. Let's move to Step 7. Step 7. Integrate the change so it doesn't fade. You've questioned your patterns. You've exposed your story. You've met the parts of yourself you used to ignore. You've built real-time awareness. You've rewritten the script. You've taken action that proves the shift is real. Now comes the step most people skip, the step that determines whether your transformation lasts or collapses back into old habits the moment life gets noisy. Integration. Carl Jung emphasized that real change happens only when you integrate the different parts of yourself into a unified whole, not when you piece together a bunch of separate improvements and hope they stick. Integration means the new mindset isn't something you remember occasionally. It's something you operate from naturally. Let's break it down. Integration is the moment the new way becomes the default way. You're no longer debating whether to use the old script or the new script. You're no longer trying to stay aware. You are aware. You're no longer pushing the old patterns away. They've lost their grip because you've understood them. Integration is when the internal conflict fades. It's when you stop treating growth like a project and start treating it like a normal expression of who you are. And here's what it actually looks like in your daily life. You catch a familiar reaction starting, and instead of fighting it, you see it with clarity and choose differently without stressing over it. You hear the old narrative pop up in your mind, and it feels outdated instead of convincing. You notice the parts of yourself you once suppressed, and now they feel like resources rather than problems. You take small, aligned actions, and they no longer feel like trying. They feel like you being yourself. Integration isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It shows up in consistency, not intensity. Here's the part most people miss. A mindset doesn't transform because you learned something new. It transforms because you absorbed it. Absorbed meaning. Your thoughts reflect it. Your reactions reflect it. Your decisions reflect it. Your self-perception reflects it. And that happens through repetition, not force. Through awareness, not pressure. Through alignment, not perfection. Integration isn't about being flawless. It's about being congruent. The inside matches the outside. Your intentions match your actions. Your choices match the identity you're stepping into. Your story matches your direction. Your mindset matches the version of you you're actively becoming. So, are you going to keep letting your old patterns run the show? Or are you going to take the controls and actually transform your mindset? Because now you know how.